Should I go? We'd like to bid good evening to our studio and our television land audience as tonight me, myself, and Steve Levine here discuss the life of the poet. Our first subject will be the formative years.
Ages 1 through 12.
Ages 1 through 12. Steve?
Shoot, Susie.
I beat you. Can you tell me when and where you were born?
Well, I was born in Brooklyn, New York, in the Brooklyn Jewish Hospital in 1953, I think.
Fascinating.
How about you?
I was born in a submarine transversing the Atlantic in 1955. Do you have any interesting tales you'd like to tell about the Brooklyn Hospital?
Well, I can't tell any, particular tales about my birth because I don't, I really don't remember it that. Well, I don't remember my birth that clearly, but my mother at one point was getting her training as a nurse at Brooklyn Jewish Hospital, and Roy Rogers showed up for to entertain the kids, and he brought his horse Trigger, and as he was entertaining his kids, the horse stepped on a nurse's foot and broke it. Literally smashed it. And that's what I can see. What other stories about Brooklyn Jewish Hospital? Albert Einstein was a patient there. And when Albert Einstein died, they removed his brain to see if it was like anybody else's brain, and it turned out it was, and everybody was totally disappointed.
They were disappointed about Albert's brain. What were your parents like, Steve?
My parents were like nothing ever seen on Earth.
Same here. Do you cite TV as an influence?
Yeah, I used to watch a lot of TV.
A lot
My
of TV?
favorite show was Mighty Mouse.
Me too.
But how does this all tie into our lives as a poet?
Well, can you remember any particular events in school that caused you to be a poet?
No, not
No.
any.
Would you like to tell us a story about your favorite teacher?
No. No, but I can think of instances in my childhood that made me be a poet. I can think of my dear old mother and I compiling lists that of synonyms, words that. So when I was real young, I learned every word that sounded the same. So what did your parents do for you?
My parents kept me in a small room and gave me water and food, and that was all. And until the age of 13, I was not allowed to go out or socialize.
How young
That's
were
not
you when
true.
you wrote your first poem?
20.
20?
20, yeah.
That's pretty young.
Yeah. Oh, well.
Do you remember it at all?
No. It had a great line in it. It had a little word play in it about Amelia Earhart and earwigs flying through the brains. What was your first work? What did it deal with?
Well, I hate to keep talking about my mother, but my first work was a poem I wrote with my mother. It was an assignment for school. And I remember one line from it. It was, "We fished, we ate out, and ate delicious trout." Genius at an early age.
Do you have any pets that might have been an influence, say a pet cat or a dog or a frog or a fish?
Well, speaking of pet frogs, I used to have a pet frog, but I couldn't keep him in any sunlight. I had to keep him in the cellar, so he died, and I threw him up on the roof of the garage.
Up on the roof?
I had a pet praying mantis, too, that I used to lead around on a small leash. But that's neither here nor there, I guess. What kind of pets did you have that made you be a poet?
I had a turtle named Greenleaf for 2 years, and it died. But it crawled away, and it was never to be found. It just crawled away.
Crawled off to the turtle graveyard.
Tell me some of your hobbies.
As a kid?
You were talking to our fellow poet Tom Savage just the other night. No, it was
No,
Michael Slater, wasn't it?
It was Michael Slater. I was talking about my preoccupation with death and destruction when I was young, with matches and fire, and how I used to set little cardboard houses on fire, as well as dead animals that we happened by. One day we found a dead crow that I tried to set on fire, but it wouldn't go up. So I sprayed it with Right Guard. Then it went up. It smelled like Dachau in the locker room combined.
I used to burn leaves with magnifying glasses. Did you have any peculiar habits?
Yeah, but none that I want to talk about.
Were you
What
sickly
kind
as
of
a
peculiar?
child?
Very
kind of
sickly.
peculiar?
I was sick up here all the time.
Were you an outcast as an adolescent or in your prepubescent years?
Sure I was. I always said when we played baseball, they put me in left field because nobody would hit the balls to left field. That's how sad everything was.
I was always chosen last to be on any team. Well, Steve, would you like to tell me something of your high school? You want to ask me some questions?
Sure. Let me ask you these questions.
Okay.
Susie, when and where were you born? Oh, you answered that.
I answered that.
Do you have any stories about the place of your birth?
No, none whatsoever.
Tell me about your parents.
They were nothing to me.
Your parents were great.
No, my parents were great people.
Your parents were great communists.
Great. No, no.
Well,
No.
they were communists.
No.
No?
They weren't communists.
Oh, I'm sorry. Aunts, uncles, brothers, sisters.
I had an Uncle Henry who was an alcoholic, and Uncle Henry was my great uncle, and he was in a wheelchair. And my great-grandmother told me that my grandmother told me that Uncle Henry was in a wheelchair because he slipped on a banana peel. I asked him to verify it, and he kicked me out. I had a great aunt. I had a great Aunt Helen who was living before her death with my great Aunt Elsie. And Aunt Helen would always promise to give me wonderful toys. She would promise to give me boxes and jewelry because she knew she was senile and she would forget after dinner. And
Well, were you sickly as a child?
Was I
As a
sickly
young
as a
child
child?
poet?
no, I was in the best of health. I had all the basic diseases.
And you weren't an outcast as an adolescent?
I was a semi-outcast.
Oh, but you
Everybody said you're nice, but you're strange.
and you were about to move into being a full-fledged outcast
yes.
as you reached your high school years.
I was a high school dropout.
Oh yeah?
Yeah.
So is my brother.
Yeah, I know. I met your brother.
So did I. Well,
No, Jeff's a
what
great
about
guy.
what about college? Oh, college. Yeah, what of
about
it? Let's move on to our next section here on our interview sheet, entitled "The Poet as Public Figure." And I'll hit you up with these questions. You beep?
I beep.
Okay. How do you feel walking the streets as a poet?
Very strange, very strange. I know that as a poet, everybody's eyes are focused on me. And in fact, I am the focus of world attention. I know that I am not safe for one moment out on the streets as a poet. The lot of the poet is a dangerous one.
Yeah, cars keep jumping curbs
Cars
and attacking
jump-
poets all
Right.
the time.
People throw fruit at me. People yell at me and harass me. You're wrecking the language, they cry. It's true. It's no joke.
Do you find your poetry readings to be a satisfactory form of making your works known to the general public, or do you have to rely on cable TV shows?
I have to rely on anything I can get. How about you?
Well, that's a good question. Yeah, I think my readings are okay.
Well, then we can sum up that question with more and more and more. How do you like it? How do you like it?
Well, here's a really knockout question. How do you interact with your fellow poets?
I love them all, each and every one. You'll never hear me say a bad word against a fellow poet.
Except for what's his name?
Yeah, and then there's her. Outside of that, though, I love to interact with my fellow poets all the time.
Yeah, I especially like to run into them at poetry readings.
Me too.
That's where they usually are.
And that's about it.
And the funny thing is that those poets are generally unkempt and soiled people.
Do you think that poets are unkempt and soiled people?
I believe most anything I read. And that's the next question. Are poets generally unkempt and soiled people?
I don't know, are they?
Yeah, I believe so. I think it's
Really?
necessary to their craft and trade, you know? Hey. And I think that's one of the reasons that so many poets die young.
Do they die young? Well, cite some causes, Steve. Causes and examples.
Causes and examples of poets dying young?
Yeah.
Dysentery. Having that strange disease called a beast with two backs. I don't know. I mean, what's...
Suicides? Why there's
suicides.
Sylvia Plath? Did Delmore Schwartz commit suicide?
In a manner of speaking, you know, they found him in a flop house,
Oh,
sort of dead.
sort of dead, huh? How about the guy who fell off the bar stool and broke his neck? What was that?
He planned that. That was
He planned it? Was
premeditated
that
suicide. Well, I can think of a lot of poets who died young.
Who
William
else?
Carlos Williams, Wallace Stevens, William Blake.
Pound died very young. A young man nipped in
He
the...
did. After a certain
Time of
point, they
life.
were dead.
They were dead after a certain point.
Speaking of age and poetry, is it true? I mean, is it really true that there's nothing on earth more venerable than the aged poet?
Yes, I think so, considering the disaster of the life of a poet and how every moment for a poet is intensified and
Reality.
over reality. That the poet lives to be beyond puberty and prepubescence is even to me an amazement and a wonder. I know every day of my life is a struggle as a writer.
Well, one of the reasons that there's nothing on earth more venerable than the aged poet is that they all die young.
That's another.
Except for
that's
one or
another
two.
fact. Except for one or two.
So
Who
where
are
does
they?
that leave us?
Well,
Question
let's
7.
move on to.
Why are all poets promiscuous, except for the young?
I don't agree with that. I don't think that all poets are promiscuous. Do you think that that's true?
I thought that was why they died young. You know, they're getting repaid for their sins.
Maybe 90%. Let's speak in percent here.
In percentages?
Yeah. Do you beat
83% of all young poets are promiscuous.
Roger?
Roger? No, not Roger.
Over and out.
Roger's not even on TV anymore.
Oh, but this is.
Which leads me to my next question. Are poets these days influenced by the great social and moral issues at hand, such as nuclear holocaust? I would say so.
Yeah, sure. Sure.
And why not?
Why not?
Well, let's talk about nuclear holocaust.
Well, sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night and I'll hear a little airplane landing. I'll just hear it landing and I'll think, here they come. They're coming now with the bombs. What will become of my work?
And who will be around
That
to
shows
read
you how
it?
devoted I am. Who will read my works? No one. No one at all.
I used to think a lot about that, you know, when I was in high school. And one morning I was lying in bed and I was sort of awoken by the whole house rocking back and forth. And I was sure that somebody dropped a bomb, but it just turned out to be an earthquake, so everything was all right.
Glad to hear it.
Well, it wasn't that bad, you know, minor tremor.
Tremors. Delirious tremors. Okay.
Well, you want to move on?
Yes, let's move on to
The poet at home, the most interesting section of this show. we not only get to babble incoherently, but we get to show diagrams. The first diagram.
Our first diagram here is a diagram of our tenement home.
We live at 52.
And
Well, I
East
shouldn't
7th
give out the
Street.
address.
Don't give out the address. First,
Here-
we have some ships showing the
Oh, wait a
greater,
second.
the overall.
This is the view that we see from our living
This
room.
is, this is the view from our tenement home. As you know, all poets must suffer. Can you see that? Is that too shiny? Okay, as you can see, it's the America and the United States sailing out of New York Harbor.
And they're both going in different ways.
Here's the Chrysler Building, and here's the Empire State Building, and
And here I am
let's
waving
see.
from this window.
Yes, there's Steve, and there's Susie.
There's
Let's see.
Gary Lenhart, Greg
This is
Masters, and
this
David
is,
Hers on the top of
Here's
this website.
34th Street right here. Let's try to, well, let's just skip Times Square.
Okay, skip that. And
Here.
here we go.
Here's our little tenement home.
How should
Here,
we hold
I'll
this?
back up here. Maybe we can lift
So we
it
can
up.
point this out.
Okay.
Now this
Now
is the
this-
first, no, this is the,
Let's just discuss the space for a minute. This is the space in which we create. Here, this is the ground floor
it is?
of our little
I
tenement
thought
home.
that was,
No. This is the ground floor.
oh, okay. The ground floor is particularly
have the
devoted to
terrace.
casual living.
Casual living.
We do most of our casual living in the parlor and the terrace. Sometimes in the hall. And I spend a lot of time in the hall.
This is where we greet, here in the hall is where we greet our many noble and refined guests, many of which are of royal stock, royal blood. But all different kinds of people pass through this hall into our parlor, upstairs here to the conversation pit, the sensorium, the moon unit, Utah, the emerald room,
The hall.
the dining room. On our terrace, we have many trees and plants from nations throughout the world. Our terrace is stocked with various reptiles and amphibians from all over the world, as well as the plants. We have geckos, gators, giant crocs, rattlesnakes.
I stay
Scorpions?
in Utah. Utah and the hall.
Here's
and the hall.
the hall.
Rarely
Here's
to
the
be found in
veranda.
the conversation pit.
The conversation pit is where most of our enlightened and documented, fully taped and documented conversation all takes place. It's got a sunken fireplace.
Well,
And a sauna. And a California 10-foot bathtub. And the emerald room. Tell us about the emerald room, Steve.
the emerald room is where we keep our smoked meats. In order to make it easy to bring them into the kitchen. I really can't go into that at length.
This is the toilet here.
This is the
The
hall.
boudoir. The hall. This is the downstairs hall. Well, enough of that.
Well, time's
Now you've
wasting,
seen our
Susie.
habitat. Time's a wasting.
Let us move on to our hobbies.
Our hobby.
Show pictures, collage materials. Why do we have these hobbies?
Let's see.
Would you like to go first?
Yes.
Let's show one of our mutual hobbies first.
Steve, let's show one of our mutual hobbies first.
Let's.
This is our esteemed collection, again, world-renowned, of our postcards from great museums throughout the world.
It's a little bit of art in our own home.
Can we show
A
some
panorama
of our
of
favorites?
modern and old art.
Can we show? Yes, certainly. We'll show some of our favorites. We have postcards from friends all over. Here's a postcard from Cynthia Genzer from the Seattle Tacoma SeaTac Airport. And she superimposed a photo booth Xerox onto this picture of the airport. There's a big jet plane.
What is it?
Where's the postcard?
Here is a postcard from, I forget his last name, but his first name was Dennis. it was a person I knew in college who had a complete obsession with waterfalls. He papered his room with posters of waterfalls. And he eventually moved back to Montana where he staged rock shows, and here was a postcard that he sent me.
Okay, let's skip the ones of Europe. I would just like, however, to mention, I believe that this is, let's see here, this is the Place de la Concorde in Paris. And what my friend, the friend who sent this to me, is getting married tomorrow. And the caption she wrote on the back was, out of date, out of time, out of date.
and I'll be damned if I do.
The way she summed it up. Let's find the Mitchell Corn Palace here.
Well, why don't we just close these and move on to our other hobbies?
Sure, the Mitchell Corn Palace.
Oh, we have so much to show.
We have so much to show.
I'll show my drawings.
Show some of your drawings. Show.
This is one of my drawings. And that's all I have to say about that. I will show one other.
Okay.
That's why I'll show one other.
Well, that's the famous book, Dr. Sachs. Okay.
Good enough.
Any poet might have numerous hobbies, just like the normal person. I myself collect cheap fans from Chinatown and Azuma on 8th Street. I won't go into descriptions of these cheap fans. None of them cost more than $2, and most of them were $1 and no more. I never use them or carry them anywhere in public, and I keep most of them in a drawer. And this, I brought one of my other hobbies is making collages, and I thought I'd bring some of my materials. And I haven't used these yet, but here's one of them. Here's a little leaflet that says, "What will I do about it?" Here's some plaid paper. I suppose this stuff isn't so. Here's something. Can you go? Okay. This says torture, joy. He's got 2 different kinds of lawnmowers. Okay. Here's some wooden letters Steve gave me. Okay. Here's a picture of mommies on Easter parade. Let's see what else. Here's a girl at the state fair, 17-year-old Rhonda Heemstra, with her prize-winning calf or heifer or whatever it is at the state fair. I don't know. I've got quite a bit. Here's some Indarte. I think a 98 luxury sedan. Here's an old 98 luxury coupe. Here's a swimming pool in the Catskills.
Well, Susie, you know, we're running out of time.
Sam, step forward.
We're running out of time.
Okay. I'll put them away. All right.
Why don't we read some poems?
Okay, let's see here on the agenda. We aren't going to discuss our alarm clock.
This is our alarm clock.
Show how it works, Steve.
How it works?
I think the audience would be interested in seeing how the alarm clock works.
This is a Moonbeam alarm clock. And the interesting feature of this alarm clock is that it wakes you up, or prepares you to wake up 10 minutes before the alarm actually goes off by lighting up.
We've also brought a fine oriental rug from our home.
That we found out on the fire escape. What?
Our palatial residence is full of such examples of ancient tapestry.
I also brought my riding outfit.
Okay, are we moving? Well, wait a minute. Our next thing we will discuss is instruments and materials of the poet.
We're not going to have any time to read our poems.
Okay. These are our writing suits.
Oh, well. No poems tonight.
Okay, let's read the poems.
What poems
now
shall
we're going to
read
read the collaborations.
Are we?
Yeah, just we'll skip angularity.
Go ahead.
Okay. I saw the museum. The museum of which to I went was full of wonder, like the heat of inspiration were blue in part, of which I found especial to be entertaining, and bit lips of mine with large and joy at sights. He, I mentioned that the kind fellow who I struck me as noble-like of sorts, King Edward, he grants such were big police, who to whom I queried, do such as you speak my tongue? Oh, never mind to be wanting office speaking, what of it all? Before the eyes of mine unfolded, vast like real landscape paintings. I had them eyes for nothing dimly art or not, for inside my brain were the vast injustice of human sufferer, like I do, or anyhow when I look. We, fellows, much like tiny fish before the mighty dinosaurs. Oh, you dinosaur monster bastard, like all others, are judged. You should be to tract in yourselves the crime of which you do on the race of humanity. So good as for men and women, mares too. We must now have a world peace, mighty dinosaur museum, for one, for always. Oh, holy real big excitement it grand be. And so I might say to you, fellow, to be here of this, my little lesson, of which maybe I have got. Okay, I quote. The lily of the field will handle with care. So, you are to remember, so how happy days would sing before it, that us can jump to joy like we would in the museum I saw on the walls with many pictures, like hot dog treats in the mouth of mine to eat.
2 more minutes? Oh, I think I'll read a poem. What shall I read?
Sorry.
Down in Fagig. This is another collaboration. An expensive bare leg can always be glimpsed in their rare red slippers. You've been in America, Master, Chicago, Buffalo, San Luis, Anuejo, Philadelphia. I Sudan man, suppose you give me money. Wingtone is my home. I handed in a half-dozen coppers. Bowing down, he walked, jangling his cymbals. Food is so cooked it can easily be broken. Strangers in the palm trees, in this out-of-the-way land, a muskmelon, a bowl of ripe dates in hand. Having landed, we commenced, on that pacing old donkey of a man. Lo, a bottle, a band. The power of speech he has not. The walls were as high as my head, I recall, diving into them, those walls. Not the first savage time blushing in comfort. Honk, honk, we are off. Are we men or beasts of the road? They run to get out of our way. In the ruts, the goods are French. Strange, unearthly promenades into the dusk. Jaunty uniforms, pantaloons the color of brick. Grisette, the French dandy, is here. He is wearing white trousers like great flowers. 14 yards away, an ordinary pair, plowed and harrowed and pulverized by cultivation. They seldom sadden, men of the bath, men of the tea, men of the waters, men of the bed, men of the mat. Madmen ring bells as they go.